In the summer of 2020, I worked as a ride operator at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio. This was one of the most memorable experiences of my life so far, in both good ways and bad ways. I wanted to walk through my experience working at the park in this video. This video will include things I liked and disliked, as well as what you can expect if you're interested in working at Cedar Point. Before I get started, I must clarify that although I did not have the best time working at Cedar Point, this does not represent everyone's experience, or even the average associate experience. Many of the friends I met there had a great time working there, while others did not. Everyone's experience will be different. Depending on your location and your crew, your experience could be vastly different. Now, not everything I have to say is nice, and that may get me some hate from the coaster community and Cedar Point fans. It may also get some praise from people who don't like Cedar Point. All I ask is that you keep comments and discussions about this video as respectful as possible. Once again, this is not an attack at Cedar Point or Cedar Point Associates. My experience does not represent the experiences of Cedar Point Associates as a whole. Now, let's get to the video. The first problem I had working at Cedar Point was setting my expectations too high. I wouldn't say that my expectations were unrealistic or unreasonable, but they were much higher than the experience I received. I expected to work as a ride operator at one of my favorite roller coasters, and to be able to operate the ride from the control booth. Unfortunately, only returning employees are able to choose which rides they work at, and the ride controls are mostly operated by returning employees as well. As a first-year associate, I was sent to a family ride. I was only ever sent to roller coasters due to staffing problems, even after I expressed that I want to work at a different ride and work with a different crew. I was never given the opportunity to be trained at controls, nor operate any roller coaster from the control booth. This summer job was much different than what I had expected, but I also think my expectations were too high. I think my experience would have been slightly better if I knew what to expect. I hope this video can help some of you in that regard. I live multiple hours away from Cedar Point, but thankfully they offer employee housing. This housing isn't free and it comes directly out of your paycheck, but it's very convenient for people who aren't from the area. This housing is called Cedar Point Commons, but I'll be referring to it as the dorms throughout this video, since they're essentially just college dorms. Before I could check into the dorms, I had to head to the Cedar Point Recruiting Center first, which is directly across the street from the dorms. This is where you receive your associate ID, and where you fill out basic health and safety paperwork. Afterwards, you get to head across the street and begin the process of check-in at the dorms. Thankfully, I was able to arrange my roommate ahead of time, so it wasn't completely random. At least that was how it was supposed to go. I'll explain more later. My roommate would not arrive for another 2 weeks still, so I essentially got a room to myself for the time being. These are your typical college dorms. 2 bunk beds per room, a table in the middle, and a few storage cabinets. There's a community bathroom with toilets and showers on each floor, and a laundry room that you have to pay for on the main floor of each dorm building. In general, there's nothing wrong with the rooms themselves. The dorm buildings are very nice, but the people there can be very loud and obnoxious. I stayed in the quote-unquote quiet dorm, and it was nothing close to quiet. I could only imagine what it would have been like to stay in one of the others. To my surprise, a couple days into my stay at the dorm, my door randomly opened and some stranger walked inside my dorm with his bags. Apparently, the Cedar Point Commons management forgot I had another roommate coming, and just gave me a random roommate. It took me a couple days to sort this out with the management, but I eventually got a new room on a different floor. Due to the long work hours, the dorms are basically the only place you'll be spending your time outside of the park. At the time, I did not own a car, so I had to take the employee bus from the dorms to the park. These pick you up in the dorm's parking lot and they drop you off outside the park either by Blue Streak or near the back of the park. During the season I was there, the buses were often late, so I would recommend getting there a little early if you plan on taking them. Your first few days at the park will just be training in a classroom environment. The first day is health and safety, and the next day is IROC training for ride operators. IROC stands for the International Ride Operator Certification. It is a third-party ride operator training and certification company, used by Cedar Fair parks along with other parks like Holiday World, Nickelodeon Universe, and the Fun Spot parks. This training is pretty simple and easy to understand. You won't have any problems with the test as long as you pay attention to the videos. The only problem I had with the training was finding the building it took place in. Cedar Point generally doesn't explain where to go or how to get there very well, so let me help some of you by showing where the building is. The majority of employee training takes place across from Windseeker in these buildings. I chose to start work as soon as possible, which meant I got there over a month before the park actually opened to the public. What that meant was that no rides were operating and they were weeks away from even test cycling. So you might ask, what exactly does a ride operator do in the meantime? The answer is extensive cleaning throughout the park. Ride operators are sent to ride stations, queues, pathways, and kiddie areas to clean the park before rides are ready to start cycling. This includes scraping moss out of bricks with gum scrapers, hosing down buildings and gift shops, and other labor-intensive work. Don't forget that this is all in the hot summer sun, and there's not many shaded areas at Cedar Point. They essentially use high school and college kids as cheap labor to clean the park before the season starts. The management doesn't do anything but watch, since labor like this is below their pay grade. I know I sound awfully upset about this, but keep in mind that I was only making $9 an hour, and this was some of the most physically exhausting work I've ever done. I was sunburned, exhausted, and miserable. I would get back to my dorm at the end of the day and pass out onto my bed. I did nothing besides work all day and sleep all night. I imagine it was a lot cheaper for the park to use us instead of hiring power washers though. Speaking of sunburns, I made the grave mistake of using expired sunscreen. A few weeks in, my arms went from being sunburnt to being sun poisoned. Now, I must warn you that some of the images I'm about to show of my arms are a little graphic, so if you'd rather not see those, just skip about 30 seconds ahead. You've been warned. My arms were basically boiling in the sun, and I was diagnosed with second-degree burns on both arms. I tried to deal with the pain for a couple days, but eventually got too bad and I showed a manager. Understandably, she was shocked by how burned I was, and she let me take the rest of the day off to rest. I had a friend help me bandage my arms with gauze, and I went back to my dorm room. One day was not nearly enough time for my arms to heal though. My burns did not heal throughout the summer, due to the extreme heat and the lack of shade. I still have scars on both arms to this day from this experience. A lot of my coworkers had really bad sunburns as well, but nothing to the extent of mine. I know this experience is not typical though, so I'll end my sunburn story here. The pre-season work experience is generally just a lot of hard labor in the sun. I highly recommend waiting until the season starts, or at least a few weeks prior to the start of the season. Once the start of the season got closer, I was able to get trained at my ride location. I also got trained at a few other rides and coasters, but this was entirely due to staffing issues and luck. After a couple hundred cycles, the state comes to certify the ride, and you're eventually able to test ride it with your crew. Now this will be lots of fun for the people at roller coasters and thrill rides, but for those who get sent to family and kiddie attractions, it can be a little dull and tedious. If the attraction needs people inside it to operate, you have to ride the attraction for multiple hours, until it reaches state certification. At this point, opening day is just a few days away, so they train you at any rides with staffing issues, and you basically just practice operating the rides for the remaining days. I should also mention how breaks work and where you can eat at as an employee. When I worked there, you got one 45-minute break and one 15-minute break. The employee cafeteria in the front of the park is called the Bistro, and it is near Planet Snoopy. There's normally a pretty long line in the cafeteria, so you don't have time for much other than eating. The food's a little cheaper than the rest of the food in the park, but it's still around $10 or so. I'd recommend packing your own food if you have the time. So in general, you have a 45-minute lunch break, and then you have a 15-minute break to do anything else you need to do, like use the restroom. Regular season operation isn't too different from pre-season work, except for the longer hours, having guests in the park, and having guests on rides. Most ride op shifts will be OC, which stands for open to close. You'll usually clock in about an hour before the park opens, and you'll leave about an hour after the park closes. These shifts average at about 12 hours long. They usually feel even longer if you have to wait for the employee buses like I had to. The hot sun and the upside guests don't help much either. The worst part is that some weeks I had to work 10 days in a row. The day you get off each week is random most of the time. One week you could get Monday off, and your next day off wouldn't be until the next Friday. The long hours can be absolutely brutal at times. I was working more than 72 hours a week and I received no overtime pay for it. I had no idea the shifts would be so long, and it really knocked me off my feet. Working with the general public, you can expect to meet a lot of angry guests. I met my fair share of Karens and angry people, but every once in a while you meet a nice guest as well. You get to make their experience even better, and it helps make your work rewarding. In general, your ride placement doesn't really matter. What does matter is where you're working and with who. Sure, your favorite rides are fun to work at, but not with a bad crew or bad managers. I was located at multiple rides throughout the season. I experienced both good crews, good managers, and bad managers. One of the crews I worked with was very immature and constantly started drama. This crew had constant run-ins with managers. A lot of them just seem really grumpy and seem like they don't want to be there. While on the other hand, I've seen a lot of managers that look happy and seem like they really enjoy their job. They have passion for the work and it shows. I must say though that there's a large majority of people who work at Cedar Point who seem like they just don't want to be there. This goes for team leaders, managers, supervisors, just about everyone. This makes the work experience a lot less fun, but it differs by area. So don't worry if you didn't get the ride you wanted, because you could still have a great team and great leadership. Now, let's talk about living expenses. Generally speaking, don't expect to bring home more than a few $100s each month. After accounting for rent, food, laundry, and other living expenses, I was only able to save about half of my paycheck. If you live near Cedar Point already, these expenses won't be nearly as bad. It's going to be much more expensive for the people who aren't from the area though. You'll be losing a lot of your paycheck in these expenses. I think this job is much more valuable for the people living in this area already. If you're not from this area, you might want to give it a second thought. Now, I know throughout this video I've been pretty rough on Cedar Point, but one of the big pluses is the people you'll be meeting. There's lots of coaster enthusiasts who work here, and you'll be meeting lots of like-minded people. It's really a great opportunity to make friends and make memories you'll never forget. Once again, I must emphasize that this is not an attack at Cedar Point or anyone who's worked at Cedar Point. My experience doesn't represent the employee experience as a whole. If you're thinking about working at Cedar Point, I hope this video was informative to you, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Please remember to keep all comments respectful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.